In the United States Senate for a number of years, and I carry with that service a great number of memories. But there's one that was particularly personal that I'll never forget. The year was 2021, and the day was January 6th. The Senate chamber was filled with members who were witnessing a meeting required by our Constitution, where the Vice President presided over the Senate, where you're sitting. We gathered here and counted the electoral votes to determine who was the president as a result of the 2020 election. It's a fairly routine undertaking, but there is some solemnity to it because the Constitution requires it. And I can recall that episode because it was a hectic day. It was the same day that President Trump, leaving office because he lost that election in 2020, had called a rally down at the end of the mall. Thousands of people showed up and they decided to march on the Capitol at the president's urging and invitation. That's not unusual in this town or even this building, that protesters would gather to state their purpose as they are entitled to in a democracy. But this was different. The group that was coming up here was not protesting or gathering for speeches. They had some other intent, and we weren't sure what it was. I can recall it was a few minutes after 2 o'clock in the afternoon on that day. Vice President Pence was sitting where you are, and in the midst of the proceedings, some group, I believe now that it was the Secret Service, came in and literally physically removed Vice President Pence from where you're sitting, leaving the chair empty while we were in session. It was a startling moment. What is going on here? In a few minutes, a representative of the Capitol Police stood at the podium where you're sitting and made an announcement. Now, for those who don't know the Capitol Police, they are our security force. They are the ones who keep us safe as we do the duties of our government, and they protect everyone in the building, tourists, staff, everyone. They literally risk their lives for us. So one of them came and stood before us in uniform and said, "There's a group approaching the Capitol, and we ask you all to stay in your seats. This is going to be a safe place here in the Senate chamber. Others will join you along the walls, and don't worry about it. We're all going to be safe in this building." It wasn't 10 minutes later that another Capitol policeman came before us and said, "Plans have changed. Everyone evacuate the chamber as quickly as possible." We went outside and saw through the windows the demonstrators with their signs coming toward the Capitol. Some were beating at the windows and some were approaching the Capitol from different directions. And we were spirited off to a chamber, to another office building on Capitol Hill where we were protected. That's a day you will never forget. I'll never forget. I've been coming into this building since I was a college student at Georgetown years ago. This is a special place to me. It's not my office building. It is the United States Capitol building. It carries with it not only a history, but a significance as a symbol. It means something to have a mob take over the Capitol as happened that day, pushing members of the House and Senate to hide in broom closets and to leave the building for their own personal safety. I never dreamed that would happen in the United States of America, but I lived it, it happened, and the American people know it happened because the videos are quite graphic. They tell the story of what was going on that day. In the end of the day, many of us were in different places watching a C-SPAN broadcast the rioters coming into this chamber, spiriting, going through my desk, not just mine, but many others, posing for pictures in the presiding officer's chair. It was a scene that was sad, tragic, infuriating. I thought to myself at the time, what if we had just heard a notice that the House of Commons in Parliament in London, England, the door had been beaten down and the mob had overtaken the members of Parliament. We wouldn't believe it. It doesn't happen. This is a civilized country. England, it couldn't happen there. Well, it didn't. It happened here. And as a result of it, the Department of Justice took those people, those violent rioters, seriously and prosecuted almost 1,600 of them for wrongdoing. Some of them very serious sentences, some just trespassing. But they were all taken seriously and treated appropriately. They answered under the law for their conduct that fatal day. So what happened when this new president came to office? He decided that isn't what happened at all on January 6th. These tourists, these demonstrators were assaulted by the police. He ignored the fact that 140 law enforcement officials were injured on that day, protecting this building and the people in it. He ignored the fact that 3 or 4 people died shortly thereafter because of that experience. He decided that the people who needed our sympathy were the rioters and not the police. And so the president, and one of his first acts of office, President Trump, signed a pardon of some 1,600 individuals. I've come to the floor to report to you what's happened since, in the few weeks that have passed since that mass pardon by President Trump. I want to tell you the story today of several of the people who were involved in January 6th and pardoned by President Trump. Last week, body camera video was released depicting a traffic-related felony arrest during which a sheriff's deputy fatally shot former January 6th defendant Matthew Huddle. Not the first, incidentally, to be shot by a policeman after he was pardoned by President Trump. The video footage confirmed that there was a struggle during the incident, during which Huddle, a January 6th defendant, raised an object that the sheriff deputy believed to be a firearm. At the beginning of the traffic stop, Huddle can be seen on video stating, quote, "I just want to let you know I'm a January 6th defendant." Quote, "I stormed the Capitol. I'm waiting on my pardon." Investigators later recovered a loaded 9mm handgun and ammunition in Huddle's vehicle. Huddle was among the 1,500 individuals involved in the January 6th Capitol riot, pardoned by President Trump. Huddle had pleaded guilty to 1 count of entering and remaining in a restricted building on grounds for his role in the insurrection, and was sentenced to 6 months in prison. Peter Schwartz, sentenced to 14 years in prison on charges that included 4 counts of assaulting police officers during the January 6th attack on the Capitol. Schwartz was seen on body camera footage spraying officers with pepper spray, wielding a baton, and prosecutors allege he threw the first chair at officers, creating an opening that enabled hundreds of rioters to push back the police lines. Prior to January 6th, Schwartz had amassed criminal convictions in more than 4 different states for crimes including domestic violence, threatening his girlfriend, and assaulting security officers. One of Schwartz's former girlfriends, Chantel Holoton, a 43-year-old factory worker who has voted for President Trump 3 times, she says, recently told CBS News that she fears for her safety now that Schwartz has been pardoned and released. Holoton reports that Schwartz persistently beat her during their month-long relationship until she called the police in July of 2019, alleging that Schwartz was threatening to kill her and her son. In reacting to Schwartz's involvement in the insurrection, Holoton stated, "He found an opportunity to go and be violent. The man thrives on violence. He thrives on people fearing him." Another of Schwartz's girlfriends, Shelley Stallings, filed a police report in 2020 alleging that Schwartz bit her forehead and punched her in the head. Schwartz was one of those who was pardoned by President Trump. Jeremy Brown, one of the last January 6th defendants remaining behind bars since President Trump's blanket pardon, was released from the federal correctional institution in Atlanta on Wednesday. Brown had not yet been released because prosecutors did not consider one of his 2 criminal cases to be related to January 6th, and thus covered by the pardon. However, the Justice Department has since reversed course. In April of 2023, Brown was convicted in Tampa, Florida, of possessing a short barrel rifle, shotgun, explosive grenades, and willful retention of a national defense document, all resulting from a January 6th related law enforcement search of his residence in September of 2021. He was sentenced to 87 months in prison for those charges and released by the pardon of President Trump. Mr. President, this is a horrible situation. And sadly, tragically, these are people who never should have been pardoned by the president. They attacked the police here in this building. They desecrated this Capitol. They were not the victims. They victimized innocent people who were doing this.